Hey team, Yasin here, and in this training we're going to be talking about coaching call number 10, which is titled The New Norm. I'm super excited to go ahead and walk you through this step-by-step process on how to deliver this practice coaching call so that way you can further go ahead and continue the journey of finding your voice. Of course, we are continuing our theme of putting your transformation program together inside of this module. As always, make sure that you do not go ahead and skip these introductions. We do, of course, have the training outline available for you. And then there's that reminder that I want to go ahead and let you know is don't skip these introductions. We are going to be going through them quicker than normal, but I do want to just go ahead and let you know that they are important for you to remind yourself of, because remember, human beings need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. And so that way, over and over and over again, when you hear me talking about it, you're like, a gazillionth time again, Coach Yasin, why? And the reason is because when you go over it again and again and again, it gets more and more cemented inside of your mind, and that way it's going to become automatic for you. So let's go ahead and jump right into the reminders. Of course, the pre-call ritual is the first one. So if you have not yet at this point gone ahead and put together your pre-call ritual, please make sure that you do go ahead and do so. Make sure that you go ahead and make that into a checklist, because remember, the most disrespectful thing that you can do to the person that you are about to meet with is showing up to the meeting with your mind all over the place and really not being able to focus with them. Okay, so you want to make sure that you are going ahead and putting together some sort of practical preparation, and then from there you go ahead and talk about, okay, right before the call, making sure that you are having those mindset shifts. Very, very important to go ahead and put that together. And then also when you are actually starting the call, what are some of the routine things that you do over and over and over again, so that way it puts you in state. In the same way, when you look at basketball players, when they're about to throw a free throw, they actually practice their free throws when they are outside of the game in a very deliberate and specific way. So it's like, okay, I'm going to roll the ball, I'm going to bounce it 2 times, I'm going to go ahead and give a high five to my teammates, and then I'm going to shoot the shot, right? And so every team member, every single player has their own process of how they do it. Now, why do they do it that way? The reason they do it that way is so that way when they are in the game, when it comes time to go into game mode and they have all of this pressure and all of these people that are watching them, as soon as they do it the same way that they did it in practice, all of a sudden it calms them down, because all of a sudden they realize, okay, all I'm doing is doing the same thing that I did in practice. And so the step-by-step ritual that you are doing right before the call is putting you into that state. So it's allowing you to be able to focus, so that way you can show up as your best self, so that way you can properly coach your student or your practice student or whoever is in front of you in the best way possible. And guess what? This doesn't only apply to coaching. This doesn't only apply to your remote wellness practice. This also applies to anybody that you're meeting in general. So even if it's just a meeting that you might have with a future team member, it might be a meeting that you're having in your family life, it might be a meeting that you're having with your friends, it doesn't matter what it is. If you are going to have to show up as your best self, if you're going to have to show up in some sort of frame, in a leadership frame, in a coaching frame, whatever it might be, you can go ahead and utilize this, so that way you are properly getting into the right mindset and showing up as your best self. Okay, so make sure that you are doing that, so that way you are grounded before every single one of your calls. Of course, the next reminder after that is all about organization. Organization equals organization. So that's going to be very important to make sure that you are properly taking notes, because especially during this call, in coaching call number 10, you're going to see how valuable all of those notes that you have been taking for your student are going to become invaluable for you here, because you're actually going to need to remind your student of what their progress looked like at every stage of the entire process. And so if you have not been taking notes up until now, it is going to be extremely difficult for you to be able to remember exactly what happened 10 weeks ago. Because remember, we're talking about 10 weeks prior to this entire process that we're going through right now, right? And so right now for you, as you're practicing these practice coaching calls with your partner here in RWA, it's going by much faster, but you have to keep in mind the end result of this in the one-on-one model is going to happen over the course of a number of months, right? So you're talking about 10 weeks into it. You're talking about that's almost 2.5 months into this entire process. And so I'm telling you right now, you probably cannot remember what you ate for breakfast 2 weeks ago. Never mind something else that happened in somebody else's life 10 weeks ago, okay? And that's assuming that you only have one student inside of your program. Imagine if you have multiple students inside of your program. Trust me, you're not going to remember, and that's why it's going to be so important to make sure that you are actively taking notes throughout this process, and you're actually organizing those notes so that way you can actually refer back to them in the future, okay? So that is going to be extremely important. Of course, the other reminder that we do always go through is an emphasis on remembering that these are your practice training modules. And so the purposes of the scripts and the frameworks and everything we're providing for you is to be able to find your own voice. If you are going off of this verbatim and you're using the scripts that we're providing, it is going to be extremely difficult for you to actually not sound like a robot. You're going to sound extremely inauthentic. It's going to be very difficult for you. Now, the reason we went ahead and did this is because the vast majority of students, RWA students that are going through this program, do need that structure. They do need that foundation. They need that kind of launch pad to be able to go ahead and have that structure in the beginning. And then as you find your voice, you're slowly being able to go ahead and ditch the script. And you already know, we've already started doing that in the last few coaching calls, is really starting to urge you to ditch the script and really start to be able to kind of have the bullet points, kind of have the big points that you want to make. And then over time, you're going to go ahead and get better and better at this, because that is the done for you, do it yourself approach. And that is exactly how you're going to be customizing this in the one-on-one model for the student that is in front of you, based off of the intake form, based off of their goals, based off of all of that. Okay, so that is ultimately the purpose of module 5, is to be able to help you find your voice and build your confidence, because ultimately, unless you have that, nothing else is actually going to work. Okay, so that's very important. As we went ahead and introduced in a previous training, we also talked about the 4 levels of learning. And so as you're going through this process, you're going to quickly realize, oh snap, I am at the level of conscious incompetence. You become conscious of the fact that there is a deficit in the skill set that you have, and you actually are going to have to put in the reps to get better. The incompetence that you have in being able to deliver these coaching calls is going to become blatantly obvious for you. But then guess what? You're going to stick with it. Yes, you're going to suck in the beginning. Guess what? We all sucked in the beginning, right? Many of us, myself included, still suck at so many things, okay? I still suck at a lot of these coaching call things, right? It just so happens that in some narrow domain of these coaching calls, I've stuck with it long enough to the point where I've reached unconscious competence, right? And I've said this many times before, I'm not special. All of the RWA coaches here are in the same boat as well. For all of us, we were at that stage of, in the beginning, we were unconsciously incompetent. We didn't even know how badly we sucked. And then we stuck with it. And then guess what? We got into that valley of despair. This is what we call the valley of despair. The valley of despair is when we all of a sudden start to realize, oh snap, I really suck. Man, I'm starting to become conscious of my incompetence, right? And then you stick with it, you keep sticking with it, you keep sticking with it. Remember, skill equals knowledge times reps, okay? Because as soon as you get the knowledge, right, which is what these trainings are providing for you, this is what this individual lacks. The unconscious, incompetent person doesn't have the knowledge. They don't even know what they don't know. And so once they get the knowledge, all of a sudden they get into that second stage, which is the conscious incompetence, because they now have the knowledge, but they don't have the reps. They don't have the repetition. And so all of a sudden they realize, oh snap, I don't have the skill. And then when you put in the reps, you take 1 rep, 2 rep, 3 rep, 4 rep, 5 rep, you start to get to the stage of conscious competence, but you don't yet have enough reps where it's unconscious for you to be able to do that skill. And so when you do that skill over and over and over again, you start to progress and you say, okay, now I'm consciously competent. And then eventually you get enough reps, okay? You get enough reps, dozens of reps. I'm talking about, 50 plus reps, 100 plus reps, thousands of reps over and over and over again. Of course, depending on the skill that you're trying to learn, maybe 1,000 plus reps might not be necessary, but I'm just giving an example here. But eventually you get to the point where it becomes unconsciously competent for you that you can do it in your sleep. And that is what we are talking about when you actually have mastery over a skill, is when you get to the point of unconscious competence. And that's exactly the process that you are going through. That's exactly the reason why we say that quote over and over and over again, is that you may not be ready now, but through the process, you will become ready. This right here, ladies and gentlemen, this right here, my friends, is the process. This is the process that if you stick with it long enough, you will become good enough to be able to get to the point where you are unconsciously competent. And the cool thing about this is that this does not only apply to practice coaching calls. Guess what? This is going to apply to every single domain of your life, whether that be health, whether that be wealth, whether that be relationships, whether that be a connection to something greater. It's going to apply across the entire spectrum of all 4 areas of life. Even when you start getting into the money-making portion of things, we're going to guide you. We're going to hold your hand every step of the way. We're going to provide you all of this templates. We're going to provide you all of the support. But guess what? That's only going to get you to the point where you have the knowledge, and you're going to get to the point where you're consciously incompetent, and that is where the vast majority of people stop, because all of a sudden they're in that valley of despair, and they're all of a sudden realizing, oh man, this is going to be a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. And then that's where shiny object syndrome, SOS, we call it shiny object syndrome. That's where the grass is greener on the other side really starts to hit you, and you say, oh snap, you know what? It's probably going to be better over there. I'm not going to have to go ahead and really work as hard. Well, guess what? If you actually look at it, when you are in that shiny object syndrome, when it looks like the grass is greener on the other side, you know what you really are? You're unconsciously incompetent, because you're looking at it from afar and you're like, you know what? I think I'd be pretty good at that. But in reality, you're going to suck just as much at that new thing as you are in the thing that you have right now. You just don't know it yet, because you haven't gotten the knowledge yet of what it actually takes in order to be successful in that other domain of life. And so you're unconsciously incompetent. And so you jump from one vehicle where you're consciously incompetent, right? Because you got the knowledge, you're like, oh snap, this is going to be difficult. I'm going to jump ship and I'm going to go over here. And so now you were unconscious incompetent over here, but then you got the knowledge over there. And then guess what? You're back to conscious incompetence. And so many people end up in this constant cycle where they're like consciously incompetent. And then all of a sudden they say, oh, you know what? I'm going to jump ship. I'm going to go to this new opportunity. I'm going to go ahead and do this other thing. And then all of a sudden they were unconsciously incompetent over there. And then they get a little bit of knowledge. They realize, oh snap, I'm incompetent, right? I'm consciously incompetent now. And then they go ahead and jump ship again. And so the only solution to this, okay, I'm going to say this again and again and again. You're going to hear me say this throughout the rest of the entire program going forward, because I'm telling you, this is where the number one biggest mistake that beginners and amateurs make is that the only way to win this game, the only way to win this boss, right? Imagine if you're playing a video game and there's multiple bosses that you have to beat, right? If you got to beat this boss, the only way to do so is through one word and one word only. That is focus. And then second word is consistency, okay? Focus and consistency to be able to put in the reps, so that way you can actually get past that level of learning and become consciously competent. And then eventually with enough repetition, you will become unconsciously competent. This is so absolutely critical. And you're going to see this as a theme as we talk about throughout the rest of the program, as we start to get into kind of the practical, the tactical. Guess what? At a certain point, you're going to have everything that there is to know about a certain topic. We're going to give you everything that there is to know about marketing, about sales, about business operations, about how to become the best goddamn person on the planet who can run a $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 a month business. You're going to have all of it. But the problem is going to be your execution of all of that. And that's exactly what we're going to guide you through, so that way you can actually be successful with this, so that way you don't get shiny object syndrome and actually show up every single day and put in the reps, okay? So that is what I wanted to go ahead and talk to you about here, and the importance of the 4 stages of learning, and that's going to be a theme that we are going to be talking about going forward as well, okay? Now let's go ahead and turn our attention over to coaching call number 10 specifically. And so inside of practice coaching call number 10, this is going to be where we're going to be talking about taking the student through a journey to recognize how far they have come inside of your training modules and inside of your transformation program so far. And so there is going to be some new information, as you're going to see in just a second, about more of the mindset related to the clouds and the dirt, the clouds and the trenches, right? We've talked about this before. You're going to see a lot of this as repetition from what it is that you already learned about in a different way. You're going to see that in just a second, okay? However, the new information isn't going to be kind of like, hard-packed new information the way that other new informations were. You're going to see what I mean by that in just a second. And then if you do need a refresher on this as well, and some of these topics, make sure that you do go ahead and reference the appropriate trainings from module 3 about this. We talk about the recharging and the 6 W's, as well as in the final training of module 3, we talked about the past, present, future me activity. That is going to be something that we are going to be referencing here as well. So if you do need that, make sure that you do go ahead and pay attention to that as well, okay? So with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about this right here. Is this exact same wording that you're going to be using? No. Remember, ditch the script. You're going to have a toolbox. We are facilitating your entire process of finding your voice. Just keep on remembering that. Of course, you are going to be using your coaching call skills as well throughout this entire process. This is going to be very important for you. Student action notes. There is going to be a new student action notes document for practice coaching call number 10. Make sure you go ahead and download it, save it in the appropriate Google Drive folder, and be prepared to be able to utilize it for your practice coaching call with your practice student. Okay, that is going to be very important. And then remember, we are going to be learning how to send it to the student 1 to 2 days before the coaching call as well. And then in regards to the actual coaching call guide, there is going to be another coaching call guide that goes along with practice coaching call number 10, as well as the slides that is going to go along with this as well. Just keep in mind that as we are going through this process and as you do come up with your remote wellness practices name in upcoming modules, we are going to be walking you through how to edit a lot of these. Just make sure that you do have the licensing agreement in place. That is going to be very important. Okay. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop into the explanation. Of course, you already know you want to go ahead and make sure that you do zoom in and zoom out. That is going to be very important. Otherwise, you're going to be lost in a wall of words. And then of course, remember our important little challenge that we have for you, that to be able to actually start trying to ditch the script, but still working on staying on track, right? So can you do it? Challenge accepted, question mark. Which one are you going to be? If you do need to go ahead and make some bullet points for yourself so that way you don't miss important points, that is going to be important for you. But just remember, hey, practice, and you will be able to go ahead and get a hang of it. So let's go ahead and hop into the actual explanation and script for practice coaching call number 10. Of course, the first part is the rapport section. Nothing major over here. Of course, you already know that this is going to be custom based off of the student and the rapport that you are building with that student. Just make sure that you are brief and that you don't linger here. That is going to be very important. Of course, then we do continue our ritual of what's going well. We go ahead and touch base with the student and we go ahead and see what has gone well with the action steps and what's been going on well in general inside of their life over the last 7 days. And then we go ahead and reaffirm that with energy. Make sure that you do not let the student go down the rabbit hole of what's not working. And you can go ahead and use the scripting from coaching call number 1 if the student starts to go negative. Okay, so that is going to be part number 1. We then go ahead and get into part number 2, which is the challenges and the obstacles. Again, no major changes here in terms of the scripting and the guidelines because this is going to be extremely custom. But again, remember, for the purposes of the practice calls, we would urge you to go ahead and pick a couple different coaching sequences, as well as starting to be able to customize your own coaching sequences based off of the questions that you are organically finding yourself. Because as you're doing the process, this is the beautiful thing about putting in the work. When you actually put in the work, you innovate. You find things that work better for you. And guess what? When you find things that work better for you, those things are also going to help other students. And that way you can share and you can actually facilitate it for the rest of the RWA student family as well. Okay. So biggest thing on here, just make sure that you are coaching on obstacles, approaching with curiosity. And then for the practice calls, make sure that you are picking some different questions. And then if you're a partner in that coaching call, make sure that you do actually go ahead and play along and role play with your partner. So that way you can help facilitate that entire process. And then at the end of this module, we'll go ahead and put everything together in a massive bank. So that way we can go ahead and pick and choose depending on what would suit us best at that point. Okay. So that is going to be part number 2. From there, we actually go ahead and get into part number 3, which is the new information part of practice coaching call number 10. Of course, as always, we are starting with getting permission. And then from there, we go ahead and now I'm going to go ahead and switch back and forth between the coaching frame as well as the frame of talking to you guys as RWA students. Okay. So the very first thing we do is we go ahead and give context to be able to show the importance of what it is that we are talking about. Okay, so we go ahead and start. Remember, I'm talking to Tina over here. So, hey, Tina, have you ever wondered what is the right balance of working hard and pushing forward versus stepping back and acknowledging how far you've come, right? Well, that's exactly what it is that we're going to be talking about today, right? And I'm going to break frame here, talk to you guys as RWA students. You're going to notice my tonality there, right? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Exactly, right? So just the tonality of it is kind of reassuring the student, like, okay, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about in this coaching call. So again, I know I hit this on multiple coaching calls over and over and over again, but this is what it means to be able to find your voice. It means to be able to have the confidence to be able to speak in a certain way, and it allows you to be able to have that free-flowing energy. And honestly, I know you can't see my face right now, but a lot of this also comes from smiling, right? A lot of this comes from you genuinely having a fun time in this process. I know you might have heard me laughing laughing and having a good time in previous practice coaching call recordings and trainings as well, is because genuinely, as you're doing this, you're smiling, you're laughing, like you're having a good time, and it becomes contagious. And I'll be honest, if there's two people who are saying offensive things, if one person is smiling while they're doing it, they have a higher likelihood to be able to get away with it, right? And I'm not saying that you should go out there and condoning going ahead and saying offensive things, but what I'm saying is that if you actually have a smile on your face, the student is going to be a lot more forgiving because of the fact that you have this energy that is contagious. And so a lot of times you might be able to mess up a lot more. But if you're doing it from a place of actually enjoying it, you have a smile on your face, you're actually laughing, you're actually enjoying the process, then guess what? The student that you're working with is going to be a lot more forgiving, okay? So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get back into frame here and say, okay, Tina, today I want to walk you through something that's called a mental model or framework that really successful people use to balance between work mode versus celebration mode. Let me go ahead and explain. So work mode is when we are busy focusing so much on what we need to do, where we need to go, where we're lacking, what exactly we need to focus on. That's work mode, okay? Versus celebration mode is when we really take a step back, right? We get our head above the water and we really look back and we celebrate how far we've come. And then we also look forward and we start to plan where it is that we are headed, okay? Now, let me go ahead and explain this with a few images so that way we can go ahead and really cement this kind of vague conceptual idea. We can go ahead and cement it with some images, okay? Now, break frame, talk to you guys as RWA students. You're going to notice a lot of this was ad-libbed as I was going along and it wasn't verbatim from the script. That's normal. That's how it's supposed to be. So that way, as you find your voice and you harness this skill, that's exactly what it's going to look like, okay? Then we go ahead and get back into frame over here. We say, cool. So when we're really busy working and having our mind focus on what we're doing and exactly what we have in front of us, we can sometimes feel like we're in the weeds, right? We're in the trenches. You can see this visual image that I have on the screen right now. Tina, yeah, you can see it. Awesome. It's kind of like when we're that bird, right? We're inside of the forest. We're kind of in the weeds. We're in the trenches, right? We're in the trenches putting in the work, right? We're in the forest pushing forward and asking ourselves, okay, what do I need to do now? What are my next steps, right? What do I need to work on right now, right? Have you ever felt like that? Have you ever felt like you were so focused on like today, the current problems, the current situations? Have you ever felt like that? Yes. Okay. But the issue with this mindset is that when we're in the trenches, it's really hard for us to be able to see the bigger picture, right? We're in the forest and in the trees, but we can't see the overall picture. And the reason why this is dangerous is because if we're always focused on the now, it's easy for us to be able to get lost in what is current, right? And what happens when we get focused on the current events, the current problems, the current situations? What happens then, right? If we're only focused on the current, then it's very easy for us to end up with Niagara syndrome, just like we talked about before. Remember? Yeah, exactly. And so that is why we have to balance this in the trenches mindset and this in the trenches thinking with what we call clouds thinking, okay? It's about getting our head above the water and seeing the overall picture and where all of this current is actually headed, right? Because we want to be able to see, okay, where is all of this going to lead? Because we definitely don't want to end up leading on the edge of the Niagara Falls and then having a fall in our life, right? And so this is visually what it looks like. Instead of the eagle being inside of the forest, they're able to go ahead and fly high above all of the trees and be able to say, okay, there's a river coming up, there's a mountain coming up, there's this coming up, right? So you're able to go ahead and really see, okay, this is how far I've gotten, and this is what's upcoming in the future, right? So you can look back, acknowledge and celebrate, and then you can also plan for the future rather than being stuck in the trees. Now, both are very important, but there has to be a balance between the two, right? So this is what we call the difference between being in the clouds versus being in the trenches, right? So visually, this is what it looks like, right? It's the difference between having your head above the water, seeing the 30,000 foot overview versus getting in the trenches and doing the work, right? And so this is a table that I've gone ahead and put together for you, Tina, to be able to show you the difference of this, okay? Now I'm going to break frame and talk to you guys as RWA students. This is where if you decided you want to kind of go read through this verbatim, you can do so if that's kind of the flow and how things are going. If the student is kind of, reactive to that, they're kind of showing interest in that, right? So it's okay, cool. So the clouds and the strategic and the macro mode over here is all about planning the 30,000 foot overview, the zoomed out, the overview, the above the trees, head above the water, navigating the bird's eye view, right? Stepping back from the grind, stepping back. And then the trenches micro mode is all about action, doing trenches, right? Now, obviously I'm breaking frame to show you what that looks like, but that is up to you if you want to kind of go super granular or just kind of show the visual so that way the student gets an idea of what's going on there, okay? And then we go back into frame from there. And so this, Tina, is how really successful high performers in all areas of life switch between these two modes of thinking so that way they can avoid getting Niagara syndrome because they don't actually acknowledge how far they've come and they don't plan for the future, but they also avoid being non-action takers because they actually get their hands dirty and they put in the work and get into the trenches, right? And so it's not like they have their head in the clouds and they're always just acknowledging themselves and putting, patting themselves on the back and then just planning and they never actually do any work. Both are very important. We just have to make sure that we have the balance between the two. Is this making sense so far, Tina? Yes, this is making sense so far. Awesome. And so like we said, I want to touch base on that balance point for just a second again, okay? Is that having balance between these 2 points is very, very important, okay? Because there's a danger if we only focus on one side. Now, I'm going to break frame. I want to talk to you guys as RWA students here, is that you're going to notice that I found myself as I was ad-libbing, I kind of mentioned the balance a little bit too much than what was in the script, right? So as I was kind of going through this, the script itself didn't talk about balance too much, right? Why? Because the balance section is coming up right here, right? Pushing forward, working on ourselves, balancing, all that kind of stuff, right? So it's over here that the balance is mentioned, but I found myself talking about balance too much earlier on in the script as I was ad-libbing. And so what I did was to be able to connect that, I kind of just put in a phrasing in there where I said, okay, so just like we talked about so far, we talked about balancing so far, right? We talked a little bit about the balancing. And so I would just want to go ahead and zoom in to the balancing a little bit more and talk to you specifically about why it's important for us to balance, right? And so that's how I kind of caught myself. So that way it wasn't like I was repeating myself again on what it is that we talked about. It's kind of like I changed the frame a little bit on Tina. And I said, okay, Tina, even though we talked about balancing a little bit, let's go ahead and zoom in on balance. And the reason I did that was because of the fact that I realized that this entire section of balance is over here. And I kind of mentioned it a little bit too much earlier on, right? And so that's how you can kind of catch yourself as you're finding your voice. You're kind of seamlessly kind of switching back and forth and being able to kind of keep the flow without it sounding robotic, without it sounding like you're repeating yourself, without it sounding like you're confused. You're kind of able to catch yourself on as you go along here, right? And again, remember, that comes from conscious competence and unconscious competence. It's absolutely a skill that anyone can learn. Don't tell me, hey, I'm not good at public speaking. Trust me, I'm an introvert. Even right now, as I'm recording this right now, I'm sweating it out. Trust me. It happens to me as well because I'm not somebody who this comes naturally to. It's just something that over time, the more you practice this, you will be able to get better at it. And I'm telling you, if you stick with it, you will also get better at it over time as well. And so from there, with that note, we just go ahead and get back into the actual scripting on here, right? So we say, okay, cool. So having balance between the two, like we already talked about, is very important. I want to go ahead and talk to you a little bit more about that. Is that here's the thing, right? And you're going to go ahead and show this image while you actually do the explaining back here. So we go ahead and get back into frame. It's like, cool. So if all we do is we focus on pushing forward in the trenches mode, the work mode, we don't actually take the time to acknowledge ourselves and how far we've come because we're always focused on what I need to do to improve? What do I need to do to improve? What do I need to do to improve, right? And so we keep thinking that we're not good enough and what do we need to work on better? And so we keep obsessing about the gap between where we are now and the goal of where we need to go. And we always feel like we're losing all the time. And so this ultimately can feel extremely demotivating. And it feels like, man, I'm working so hard, but why am I still not good enough? Why am I really not being able to get to where it is that I want to go, right? Versus if we always have our head in the clouds, right? We're always acknowledging ourselves. We're always patting ourselves on the back, right? We're always just planning for the future. We're never actually getting any work done, right? We always keep on in that mode of planning and acknowledging ourselves, but not doing any work, right? And so is this making sense how both are important, but both need to be balanced as well? Are you seeing why it's important to have the balance between the two, Tina? Yes. Okay. So every once in a while, after a season of working hard and being in the trenches, at certain points, at certain checkpoints, we need to make sure that we do actually zoom out and reflect to see how far we've actually come, right? We can't get too stuck on either side. We have to take the time to work and get in the trenches, and then we have to take the time to step back, zoom out, get our head above the water, and actually plan for the future as well. Are you with me so far, Tina? Yes, I'm with you so far. Awesome. Now, what I want to go ahead and do is I want to introduce you on how this actually applies to every single area of our life. Are you ready to see how cool this actually gets? Yes, I'm super excited to see how cool this gets. Cool. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. Now, I'm going to break frame here. I'm going to walk you through that, right? So again, I just went ahead and made kind of like my little mini intro right there, even though that wasn't a part of the script. It just felt natural at the time, and I felt like it seamlessly kind of flowed. So I just went ahead and went through it with it. Okay. Then we get back into frame. Awesome. So the question is, how do we actually organize taking the time every once in a while to step back? Right now, there's this fancy schmancy term that's called a strategic cadence, which is just a fancy phrase that means, okay, what is the schedule that we use to be able to take time to acknowledge ourselves and plan for the future so that way we don't have Niagara syndrome? Now, what I want you to know, Tina, real quick, is that whatever I'm about to talk to you right now, I'm going to go through it very quickly. It's not something that you need to know right now. Okay. All we're doing doing is we're planting seeds for the future. And I just want you to know that this concept actually exists. I just want you to know that this entire world actually exists and how beneficial it can actually be. And if it goes from one ear out the other, that I would just want you to know that that is completely fine. You do not have to worry about it. Okay. So I just want to go ahead and let you know that before you kind of get worried and think that you got to memorize everything we're about to talk about. Does that make sense? Yes. Cool. So why am I showing you this? The reason why I'm showing you this, Tina, is because the cool part about all of this is that it applies to every area of our life, right? So we talked about the big four areas of wellness. We talked about the wheel of wellness, right? And so now we're talking about the clouds understanding, and that applies to health, wealth, relationships, and a connection to something greater. So what we can actually do is on a regular basis, we can check in on different schedules in our life, on different phases of our life, in different parts of our life. We can actually check in and say, okay, how are we doing on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, or yearly level, depending on the part of our life that we're checking in on. And so just to give you an example of what this might actually look like, this is something that my wife and I work on. Now, in your case, as RWA students, if you guys are not doing this in your relationship, I would highly encourage you guys to start doing this. It's very, very, very beneficial. I've actually read numerous studies that show that the only relationships that last long term that have some sort of cadence to be able to check in and work on their relationship. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily have to be as structured. It could be a little bit more informal, but it's extremely, extremely beneficial. Okay, so for example, hey, Tina, you can have a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, or yearly for your marriage, right? It's like, hey, honey, how was today, right? What are we going to be doing tomorrow? So you're looking back, seeing, okay, how was today? How did everything go? And then you're planning for the next day, right? Or hey, how was our relationship this past week? What are we going to do this upcoming week, right? So we're looking back, we're acknowledging, we're praising each other. We're saying, hey, honey, I really liked it when you did this today. Hey, honey, I really liked it when you did this past week. I really liked it when you did that. I didn't like it when you did this, XYZ, right? And then you both plan for the upcoming week, right? And you can do that on the family level as well. Hey, how was this past quarter, right? What are our plans for this upcoming quarter? How was our relationship in this past year? What is our relationship going to look like in this upcoming year, right? So we're having that element of look back as well as planning into the future, okay? And so we can actually use this concept of clouds thinking and strategic cadence in every area of our life when it comes to our relationships, when it comes to our health, when it comes to our income, when it comes to our business, when it comes to our connection to something greater, right? And so it allows us to be able to recharge, to be able to step back and get into perspective by allowing us to be able to evaluate how far we've come and really kind of congratulate ourselves, learn any lessons, reflect on those kinds of things, and then plan for the future as well. And so this is something that can be taught to kids, that can be taught to students in schools, right? Really learning how to be able to balance between these two modes so that everyone can avoid Niagara syndrome by actually taking the proper time to check in and step back. Pretty cool, huh? Now, remember, I do not want you to get overwhelmed with any of this or the details of how to do this, okay? There's templates and worksheets that we're able to provide you on how to be able to do this for, your health, as you've already learned, right? Your wealth, your relationships, your connection to something greater. But really the purpose of why I'm going ahead and exposing you to this is because I just want you to know that these are the seeds of how valuable this tool actually is. And it's a life strategy that unfortunately so few people actually know exists. And so that's exactly why I wanted to go ahead and talk to you about it today. Cool? Awesome. So the bottom line of this is that every once in a while, we need to make sure that we are taking the time to be able to get our head above the water, to balance out all of the other busy times that we have when we're working in the trenches, right? If we don't get our head above the water, let's say, for example, in our relationship and in our marriage, right? So let's say, for example, the kids are running around, we got to take the kids to school, we got to do all of this stuff. If we don't actually take the time, whether that be daily, whether that be weekly, whether that be monthly, whether that be yearly, we can kind of get stuck in all of the minutia. We can get stuck in all of the tasks and all of the to-do lists, all of the things that are going on, right? And we get stuck and we never actually get our head above the water and say, oh snap, where am I actually going in this relationship? Where are we going in this relationship? Let's actually plan ahead of time so that way we don't end up having Niagara syndrome and then waking up one day 10 years later and realizing that we're miserable in our relationship. Is this making sense? And so this is how you zoom in and zoom out. And so visually, again, this is what it looks like. Now, you might be wondering, why in the world are we talking about this today? Well, the reason we're talking about this today is because we are actually at one of those points in your transformation program in this call today where we're actually going to step back and we're going to get our head above the water. We're going to get our head into the clouds and we're going to actually look back at how far we've actually come in this process so we can see what are so far the fruits of all this labor that we've had being in the trenches. Are you ready to try it out, Tina? Yes, I'm ready to try it out. Beautiful. Let's go ahead and get into that right now. And then from there, I'm going to break frame and talk to you guys as RWA students. That's going to be where you go ahead and then transition into actually going directly into the experience exercise, which is the self-acknowledgement exercise for this specific coaching call. And so for a lot of these sections here in the self-acknowledgement exercise, I'm going to go ahead and walk you through how this is going to look like in the one-on-one format. So I'm going to go ahead and walk you through the script and then the explanation for it. Okay, so for the actual script, it's going to be cool. So to get our head above the water and into the clouds mode, what we're going to do is we're going to do a short exercise together that's called the self-acknowledgement exercise. And then when we get to the action steps for today's coaching call, I have a super awesome action step for you this week that is going to be related to this exercise as well. Okay, so for this self-acknowledgement exercise, we're going to go ahead and step back and look into and appreciate how far you've come in your journey so far. Okay, so I want us to be able to look back and see where you were when you first got started and then look at where you are right now. Sound like a plan? Yes. Okay. And so just as an explanation for what we're doing here is that this is really going to be the self-acknowledgement exercise where you help the student step back and really acknowledge themselves throughout this journey. Okay. So the purpose of this exercise is to, yes, help the student feel encouraged, but also to instill and cement the value that this program has brought into the student's life so far. Because a lot of times when we're focusing so much on improving and getting better every single week, it's kind of like the student can get into that mode where, they're like, okay, I'm still improving. I, haven't made that much progress yet. I'm still working on getting better. I'm working on getting better. And so unless you help the student be able to step back to see how far they've actually come, they're not actually going to start to realize the value of the program for them. Okay. And then on top of that, this also helps you as an RWP feel much more confident throughout this entire process because you're hearing it from your actual student that these are all of the things that you've made an impact in their life with. Okay, so that's kind of the introduction for this. From there, we go ahead and then talk about highlighting the importance of this. Okay, so before we jump into this, in addition to the explanation that we talked about with the clouds, I want to go ahead and explain to you further why this self-acknowledgement exercise is really important so that way we can actually take it seriously. Okay, so giving and receiving acknowledgement is very important and it actually nourishes us and the people around us, right? And not to mention it's very motivating because unfortunately in today's world where it's all about more, getting better, we don't ever actually take the time to acknowledge ourselves enough. In fact, most of the time we do the opposite, right? We tell ourselves that we're not enough. And so what we need to do is that instead of doing that, we need to be able to go ahead and take a second to be able to acknowledge the small wins, because if we actually just end up waiting for that big result in order to celebrate, sometimes you might actually just get so demotivated and not be able to continue long enough to be able to get that big result, right? And so what we got to do instead is we got to be able to get into the habit of acknowledging the steps along the way. Why? Because it's the little choices, the small votes, the small rocks that we stack along the way inside of this journey that creates those big results, right? And so I like to say that small hinges swing big doors. And so even though many times we like to only look at the big things, right? In reality, it's the small changes that are the most important. So today, I'm going to invite you to really take some time to brag about all of the little changes that you have made over the last few months. And so this exercise that we're going to do together is going to be all about celebrating you and your new normal. So today, you're going to go ahead and acknowledge yourself for doing such a great job over the last few months. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about that right now, right? We're going to go ahead and start off with some of the big accomplishments, right? We call these headline accomplishments, right? So I was looking back at my notes from our initial conversation back in February, and I noticed that quite a lot has changed for you, right? I recall back then you were struggling with 1, 2, 3, insert what the student was struggling with then. And so I'm curious, let's go ahead and dive into that, right? What are some of the things that you are proud of accomplishing or shifting since then, right? And so then you're going ahead and here, this is exactly where I said that it's very critical to make sure that you are taking notes throughout all this process, because this is going to be where you actually leverage all of that to be able to go ahead and let the student know and remind them of where they were at. Because here's the thing, we as human beings have this fallacy that goes on in our heads that we think that, okay, the way that we are today is the way that we've always been. The version of ourselves that we are today is the version of ourselves that we've always been. Is because we can't have like multiple personality disorder, right? That's why multiple personality disorder is a disorder, because you can't actually maintain two identities at the same time, right? Otherwise you're like bipolar, you're like, you have some mental health issues, right? And so that's why it's very difficult for people to actually remember exactly what it was like when they were in a different version of their life, right? They might have some vague memory of it, but it's not something that we readily think about because we have to actually function on a day-to-day basis in the current moment. And so you need to be able to kind of have those notes notes that are kind of like time capsules that you have saved that are allowing you to be able to remind the student of what they were like a few months ago. Because remember, 10 weeks into this, a lot of things might have changed for them. And so it's going to be very important over here to make sure that you are actually using curious exploration and really digging in deep to be able to find out. And we've gone ahead and put together some question starters here for you to be able to really find out what are some of the big headline accomplishments that the student feels that they've had over the last 10 weeks, okay? Or whenever you decide to go ahead and do this, it's typically going to be at the end, right? 10, 11, 12, around there, okay? So typically it is going to be coaching call 10. It might change one or two coaching calls left or right, but typically it is going to be at coaching call 10 because it only makes sense, right? You're not going to talk about the new norm at coaching call number 2. That wouldn't make sense. And so what you're going to be doing throughout this process is that you are going to make sure that you are taking notes for yourself, and you're going to make sure that you are listing all of the things that they are saying. And then also on top of that, you're going to make sure that you are actually going in and having the student and recommending the student go ahead and write all of those things down on their student action notes as well. The reason why it's important for the student to be writing this down for them as well is because as they're going through it, it's like as if they are taking vote and they are taking tally of all of those accomplishments for themselves as well, okay? So it's going to be very important. Here are some examples of what that kind of might look like as they are kind of tallying all of that together. But that is going to be the first section of the self-acknowledgement exercise, which is the headline accomplishments, okay? Now, I'm going to go ahead and put a note on here in regarding to a scripting that you might be able to utilize if the student actually starts to criticize themselves and starts to go negative, okay? So you might not actually end up using this every single time. For the purposes of the practice call, I would go ahead and role play, and I would recommend to go ahead and practice it so that way you actually know how to use it when it becomes relevant. But just in case the student starts to actually criticize themselves as they are thinking about the things that they actually did well over the last 10 weeks, you can go ahead and use this scripting. I'm not going to read through the scripting, but you can go ahead and read through it and make sure that you are prepping for it as well, right? So like, hey, we want to bring attention to all the little efforts that we made. It's not about judging ourselves. The future is a bunch of little moments stacked together. So that's how we got to where we are right now, right? Even if the outcome has not happened yet, because this might be typical, is that, at week number 10, depending on the student, depending on how motivated they were, depending on, how much action they took, depending on what else was going on in their life, they might not have actually attained the final outcome. But remember, this is not about the outcome, because the outcomes will take care of themselves once they actually start the process of becoming that person, once they actually start the becoming process and really get into that identity, right? And so you're just reminding them that, hey, even if that outcome hasn't happened yet, we have shifted your baseline enough, you have started the process of becoming that new identity enough that your external reality is just a reflection of your internal identity with a delay. And so as long as you are maintaining that eagerness inside of your identity on a daily basis, and you are thinking and acting and having the habits and the routines of that person, well, guess what? It's only a matter of time until the external reality actually reflects that internal identity, okay? And then also on top of that, there are additional scriptings that were available in coaching call number 1 about what goes well, just in case the student has difficulty actually acknowledging themselves. That is all some scripting that you can coach the student around if necessary. So I would highly recommend that you actually practice this as well. And then from there, that is the tail end of the headlines, right? So now we're going to go ahead and get into the old current situation. So we're going to go ahead and say, oh, cool. Now remember, this is like the seasons of life that we talked about, right? What is now our current situation used to be our desired situation before, right? And so visually, this is what it looks like. And then you kind of show the image. And so what we're going to do now, Tina, is we're going to take some time to look at what your old current situation looked like, right? So I'm curious to see how different your life is now compared to 10 weeks ago, 2.5 months ago, whatever, right? Or however you're kind of structuring this, and what your version 1.0 self looked like back then, right? What was your normal day like before you started the program, right? How was your food and your activity like before you started the program? And so what you're going to see here, I'm breaking the frame to talk to you guys as RWA students, is that we're going ahead and kind of specifically outlining, okay, what was their current situation, right? So we talked about the big headlines. That's kind of like the big ones, right? Now we're going ahead and really diving into like what they were like before they actually joined the program, what their life was like, what their movement was like, what their sleep was like, what their mindset was like, all of the other intangibles, and just really diving in and getting curious about all of those things. Because here in just a second, we're now going to go ahead and talk about what their new current situation is like. And so as a result, it's going to create this gap. And guess what? That gap is going to be the true value of where your program has actually delivered to them. And so that's why it's so absolutely critical to make sure that you are getting into every nook and cranny and really making sure that you are doing genuine curious exploration over here. And then also go ahead and recommend to the students to go ahead and fill out their student action notes as well. So that way they have a section in there that says their old current situation. So they're kind of writing down everything that was terrible in their life before they started the program, right? And so this is where you can really, really go ahead and hammer it home, right? Like really try to squeeze out the pain there of exactly what their life was like before. Now, some students, when they get into this, they're like, they don't like to think about the negatives, or they don't like to kind of admit that things were different, or maybe they even forgot. You might actually have to fish for that. You might actually have to dig for that. You might actually be like, yeah, but I remember you said this. Wasn't that true also, Tina? Yes, that was also true. Cool. So your life was XYZ back then. And so you're really going ahead and fleshing all of that out in terms of their old current situation. Okay. And then from there, we go ahead and then talk about the new current situation. All right. So awesome, Tina. Let's now shift our focus to talk about your new current situation, which is the situation that we have right now, right? Our new current situation in the blue is where we are right now. So earlier we listed the big headline accomplishments, but now I really want to zoom in to really break down how your life is right now, right? I really want to kind of figure out, okay, hey, what are all of the smaller accomplishments that might not feel like a big deal right now, but really when you start to say them out loud, you start to, wow, okay, there are already smaller things that have happened, right? So how's your activity? How's your food? How's your energy? So a lot of the same questions, I'm breaking frame to talk to you guys as RWA students now, is that a lot of the same questions that you asked that was like, okay, how was your food? How was your movement? How was your sleep? How was your recharge? How was your mindset? How was XYZ? Talk to me. What else was different, right? Ask open-ended questions, right? And so the same question that you were asking about the old current situation, you're now asking those same questions about, okay, how is that different now? Right? And then you can also dig even deeper. It's like, okay, well, what else is so much better now than it was 10 weeks ago? And you can even start to put things onto the list that might not even be related to your program, right? It might not even be related to health, but as a result of the person starting to invest inside of their health, they started seeing, oh, dang, over the last 10 weeks, this other area of my life has also improved because of the fact that I've been on this journey of personal development and getting better as well. And so what that means is that if you do need to explore a little bit more, even here, I'll go back a little bit more so you can talk about the old current situation, is that if you got to explore a little bit more and say, cool, well, what other areas of your life? This is a very good question. It's like, okay, what other areas of your life have improved as a result of you joining this program, right? Maybe not directly, but what other areas of your life have improved as a result of this, right? I'm actually going to go in here. I'm going to add this for you guys right now. It's like, what other areas of your life have improved as a result of you being on this journey, right? And so you can go ahead and start to really connect your program to other areas of the student's life. And you can see, oh snap, because they were working on getting better, they were able to go ahead and have so much growth in other areas of life as well. Okay, so you're really going ahead and making sure that you are getting into all of the nooks and crannies of this. I would highly recommend do not stop, keep going, get into every single stack of all of these small things that they have accomplished over the last few months, right? It does not matter how small it is, just make a massive list as you're going through this of all of the small things, right? If that means that you got to prepare ahead of time to be able to remind the student from all of the small things in all of your coaching call notes, so be it. But you really want to just go ahead and have a stack of all of the things that have gotten better inside of their life as a result of being inside of this program, whether that be directly or indirectly. And then the student is going ahead and doing that on their side as well. Okay, so that's what we're talking about there. And then what we do is now we go ahead and really highlight the gap. We go ahead and magnify this gap so that way we're really cementing in the student's mind the value of the program thus far, right? So it's like, okay, do you notice the difference, right? Do you see how you've started the process of bridging this gap when you first started this program, right? And then what you can do is you can really start to congratulate and make a big deal. It's like, hey, when you started this journey, you were addicted to sugary drinks and, now you've gone 3 days without any Pepsi or Coke. That's amazing, right? Before you used to barely get 5 hours of sleep at night before, and now you get at least 7 hours for the last week. That's phenomenal, right? You're making a big deal, kind of very similar to when we talk about what's going well, right? And then we go ahead and really highlight it from there and say, hey, this is your new normal in your life, a new level, right? You're looking at life from a new peak, a new mountaintop, a new springboard. There are so many more possibilities available to you because of all the work that you've put in through this program so far and all of the momentum that you've built from this climb that you've been doing so far, right? This is now your new normal. You now have a baseline of where you are, right? If we define yourself when we look at your version 1.0, right, and we're working towards our version 2.0, you can even say like, hey, maybe you're not yet at your version 2.0, right? But we can definitely say that this is like a version 1.25 or version 1.5, right? Like you're on your way to be able to get to that version 2.0 self, okay? So like I said, we might not be there 100%, but look at how much progress you've already made, okay? So I want you to understand that all of these small wins are what creates that progress. All of these small wins pile up to give you this new improved version of yourself, okay? So all the small choices that you made over the last couple months that became habits, and those habits are now creating your new lifestyle. So this new lifestyle now has become a new launching point for your version 2.0 journey. This is the new version of you. This is the new you. And then you go ahead and get a pulse on the students. So talk to me, Tina. Where's your headspace at right now? What are you thinking about? What are your thoughts, right? Are you seeing how awesome this is? And then you go ahead and have a little bit of a dialogue there to really allow the student to reflect on how far they've actually come in this process and how transformative, even if they're not at their version 2.0 self yet, that's okay, because remember, the external world is just going to be a reflection of your internal identity with a delay. And so that delay is what we have to account for. Most people don't have the patience to be able to put up with that delay. And so that's why the self-acknowledgement exercise goes ahead and allows us to see, oh snap, I am my version 1.25, my version 1.5. Maybe I'm even just my version 1.1, but still I'm on the process of becoming my version 2.0. And just the fact that I've even made a little bit of progress is evidence that I can eventually get to my version 2.0 self, no matter how big it might actually seem to me. So you're kind of just getting that dialogue going back and forth as you go through this entire process. And then after that, as if that was not enough, what we're going to go ahead and do now is we're going to go ahead and do something called expanding the time horizon, okay? And this is what's called future pacing. I'm going to walk you through this, and it's extremely powerful, because this is what we're doing is we're instilling the value of the program and really kind of re-navigating the expectations that the student might have. Because a lot of people join programs and think that, oh, you know what? When I join the program, that means that I got to be at the end result by the time I get to the end of the program, right? But the truth is that that's not how life works. Life is not linear. For every student, it is going to be different. Some students are at the point in their life that they had maybe some previous momentum that they brought into the program, or maybe they had the right habits, they had the right basics in place, and so they were able to go ahead and get results a lot faster. But for some students, that might not always be the case. And so how do we actually put into expectations and aligning those expectations of exactly why some students might end up becoming their version 2.0 by the end of the program, and some students might not be? The reason why is because of that version 1.1, the version 1.2, the version 1.3, all of that, right? And so we need ways to be able to cement in the student's mind, if by the end of the program they don't get to their version 2.0, it doesn't mean that the program was a scam. It doesn't mean that all of this was just for no reason, right? Unfortunately, that's a lot of the ways that some students might think. And so we need to kind of realign those expectations so that way they can understand that this program was the starting point of that. It does not mean that it is going to be the end all be all, that it's going to come on a silver platter and all of a sudden the student's going to just magically, snap a finger and the genie's going to go ahead and make their version 2.0 reality. At the end of the day, you got to start the process of putting in the work, and then through the process, as you stick with it, you will become your version 2.0, right? And so what we're doing now is we're going to go ahead and walk the student through expanding the time horizon to then further instill and cement the value of the program, right? So yes, exactly whatever they said, right? So yes, Tina, exactly what you said, right? This is just the beginning of your journey, right? So as you know, our main goal here at NutriFit Wellness Academy, insert remote wellness practice name here, has always been to over deliver to you again and again and again to help you turn what you want for your future into a reality. In fact, this is why we have something called the over delivery promise here at NutriFit Wellness Academy, right? Because we recognize that you have invested your time and energy and financial resources into this program and trusted us, and we don't take that responsibility lightly. So as you go through your journey, as you're going to notice that this entire process, this entire program has been so valuable for you because it's going to serve you for the rest of your life. And I don't want you to just take my word from it. I want you to be able to actually watch and see what happens. In fact, let's go ahead and explore some of those long-term benefits from this program together right now. Now, I'm going to go ahead and cut frame here for a second. I'm going to walk you through what it is that we just talked about here. Okay, so what we're doing here is obviously this image right here, we are going to be giving you the template for this image that we've gone ahead and custom made for ourselves. So once you have your remote wellness practice name, you'll be able to actually go ahead and put that image and kind of change everything around for yourself as well, right? But what we're doing here is we're going ahead and reaffirming that, hey, this is the value of the program, okay? And then what we're going to go ahead and do is explore, okay, hey, let's assume that this new current situation that you have now today, that let's say this is your new normal way of operating, right? What good things might happen with the consistent follow through over time on this baseline, right? What would it look like if you actually got good sleep for the next 2 years? Let's say, for example, Tina struggled with sleep. What would it look like if you just started making better decisions, just one new good decision every single day as a result of you having more energy and you not being so tired all the time, right? What would it look like for the next 10 years if you did that every single day, right? What would it look like if you were more rested for the next year? What would it look like if you were more rested for the next 10 years, right? What would it look like if every 90 days you created a new becoming journal and you always reminded yourself of that every single day for the next 10 years on who it is that you are becoming, right? What would all of that look like? And so what you're doing is you're expanding the time horizon, right? You already went ahead and looked at their old current situation and their new current situation over the last 10 weeks. Okay, cool. We did that. Now what we're doing is we're saying, cool, well, what about the long-term benefit of everything that it is that you learn inside of this program? And that, ladies and gentlemen, that RWA students, I'm telling you right now, is that is indisputable, is that there is no student on the planet that is going to be able to come to you and tell you that, oh snap, like I learned how to be able to get good sleep for, a few weeks and my life didn't really change. Well, guess what? What happens when you actually get good sleep over the course of the next year? Your life fundamentally changes, right? And so nobody's ever going to ever be able to dispute that your program actually had value in it because of the fact that what it is that they learned from you, just the becoming process in and of itself, the topics that you expose them to are radically going to transform their life over the long run, even if transformation didn't just happen in 10 weeks, which is sometimes, unfortunately, what some students have these expectations around, okay? Now, in terms of the actual explanation for this is a little mental rehearsal that we call future pacing, okay? So what happens is that when the student imagines their own positive progression of the long-term benefits of what it is that they are doing, they can start to imagine the fruits of their labor. And so that means that they start to feel like, okay, it makes sense for me and why I'm doing it right now. And so that way it actually drives intrinsic motivation when we actually expand the time horizon for them, okay? So that's a benefit for the student. And then a benefit for you as the remote wellness practitioner is that it goes ahead and really cements for you as well the long-term impact and the true life-changing impact that your program is having, and you're actually hearing it from your student. And so it's not always that in just a few weeks that they've had with us that they're going to be able to see all of those benefits. Truthfully, a lot of those benefits are going to come from the long-term impact of what it is that they learned from the actual program. And so you want to make sure that you are curiously exploring and saying, okay, hey, let's look at, you struggled with, drinking Coke, and you've stopped being able to drink Coke, 3 out of the 7 days of the week, right? What does that look like if this continued for the next 10 years? What would that mean for your stomach? What would that mean for your kidneys? What would that mean for your energy? What would that mean for your family? What would that mean for your budget? What would that mean for your relationships? Really just diving in to as much future potential as possible because of the fact that they've started to make some of these changes. And this is one of the biggest fallacies that we as human beings have, is that we overestimate what we can do in a few weeks and we underestimate what can actually happen in a year. We underestimate what can happen in 10 years, right? We don't actually think, I'm just, sleeping a little bit better. It's just like 1 hour more sleep every single night. Yeah, but think about the long-term implications of that. And so what you want to do is at every nook and cranny, you want to make sure that you explore, because this is what we call, quote unquote, your ammunition for how powerful your program is, right? So any single person that has anything to say against your program, any single voice that is inside of your head that has imposter syndrome to be able to say, oh, you know what, maybe my program is not valuable. This is the ammunition that you use in order to actually decimate all of that inner self-talk and the external self-talk that might come from haters or XYZ as well. Why? Because of the fact that your actual students are actually showing you and telling you the value that you are seeing. And so one of the quotes that I always like to repeat is that confidence is for children and certainty is for men and women. Okay, what does that mean? Is that confidence is that when you got to try to convince yourself that something is a different way than it actually is. But when you are certain, you know that it is the way that it is because of the fact that it happens the way that it is, right? So am I confident that the water is going to come out of my faucet when I turn it on in my kitchen? No, I'm certain. Why? Because so many times when I've done it over and over and over and over again, I know that I turn on the faucet, water comes out 99.99999% of the time, unless something's broken with the faucet, right? And so when you actually have certainty in your ability to provide value, that does not come from you convincing yourself. Certainty comes from the fact that you've actually seen it happen over and over and over again, truthfully, in reality. And so the more students that you walk through this process, your certainty continues continues to grow. In the beginning, you need a little bit of confidence. But again, remember, confidence is for children because you're trying to convince yourself that, yeah, I'm valuable. Yeah, I don't have imposter syndrome. Yeah, I can push myself through this. It's important. You got to push yourself through action in order to be able to get to the point where you are starting to have certainty. And the certainty comes when you actually hear it from your students. Hey, this was very helpful for me. Hey, this actually helped me transform my life. Hey, this was actually mind-blowing for me. The more you have more of that, it stacks the rocks, and it stacks the rocks, and eventually it becomes certainty that, hey, there is no shadow of a doubt, whether that be for the internal voice that is inside of my head or whether that be for the people out there who say that my program is not valuable. There is no doubt because I have actually heard it from the students that have gone through my program, that they have seen the value of the program as well as what the long-term implications of the program are going to be as well. Okay, so that is why it's so absolutely critical for you to make sure that you are prepared for this section. You're actually going ahead and really kind of reaping all of the benefit from it, because it's not only helping your student, but it's also helping you as well. Okay, and so then there is a section inside of these student action notes for your students as well to go ahead and really start to jot that down for themselves, because when they actually write it down for themselves, it actually starts to get real and cemented for them as well. And then you're taking notes of it on your end as well with all of your student notes also. So all of this, what it's really doing is it's sealing the value with the time horizon, okay? And so as we kind of go into the next section here, you're going to see that there is a section where you really seal the value of the time horizon for your student as well, right? So you go, whatever it is that, as you're kind of doing the time horizon section above, and so well, exactly, right? So you see, this is what we're talking about here, because everything that you've gone through inside of this program compounds, right? And so Einstein actually said that the eighth wonder of the world is compound interest. Why? Because 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 16, 16 becomes 256, right? It builds on top of each other very, very quickly. And so compounding is so powerful, because here's the truth. The benefit of your program, Tina, is not just the program. It's the benefit of your program long term, right? So let's say, for example, you improve your sleep for a couple weeks, no big deal, right? You just might have a little bit better sleep. But let's say, for example, you improve your sleep for 6 months. Guess what happens? Your life fundamentally changes. The same thing with blood sugar. Let's say, for example, there's the benefit of not spiking your blood sugar and crashing your insulin for 1 meal, but then there's the compounding effect of those results after 50 meals. What is that? Life-changing. And so this applies to every area of your life that we touched on inside of this program, like fill in the blank, insert relevant personalized info here, right? And so just improving your life 1% in these last weeks, sure, it might not always feel like a lot right now, but 1% improvement for 6 months or 12 months fundamentally changes the trajectory of your life. And 1%, guess what? Over the course of 10 years, forget about it, right? It's just not even countable. And so yes, there are benefits of the program, and then there are the benefits of the long-term implementation of the program. Is this making sense, Tina? Yes, this is making sense, okay? And then on that high note, we then go ahead and plant seeds for the embedded invitation, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and walk you through what that script is gonna look like here on the right side, but I do need to make sure that I go ahead and explain it to you first, so that way you understand exactly where we're headed with this, okay? So like we talked about in previous trainings, embedded invitations are also known as seeding, okay? It's where we're planting the seed for the student to renew with us and keep on working with us, okay? So we talked about this earlier. Now, why is this important? The reason why this is important is because as the first 90-day transformation program comes to a close, the student is naturally going to start to feel like, oh no, there's only 2 coaching calls left. I'm scared, it's ending, right? And so this is one of the big reasons why students might not actually show up for the coaching calls. They might try to postpone them. They might say something's actually happening in their life, XYZ, right? They might not even sometimes know that they're doing it consciously, but you will know as an RWP subconsciously that that's exactly what they are doing, right? And so if they do feel these things, all we're doing by really talking about these embedded invitations that I'm about to walk you through right now is we're really going ahead and reassuring them that, hey, you know what? It's not going to come to an end, because what's the end of this that you think is the end of it is actually the start of something much more amazing that is upcoming, right? And so we're kind of planting these seeds so that subconsciously they're not self-sabotaging themselves, and they're understanding like, hey, it's not about to end. It could go on if I wanted it to go on. Now, why is that important? The reason why this is important is because the student is always going to want to learn. They're always going to be growing. They're always going to be getting better in life. And they're always going to have problems that need to be solved. There's always going to be a new identity that they need to work towards, right? But now that they have a relationship with you, why should they go out and try to find somebody else to help them with that stuff, right? There's just so much work that they could be doing with you that would actually help the student go deeper instead of having them go through kind of like a quick drive-through and then jumping around with different coaches and never actually developing a deep relationship with all of the different coaches in their life, right? And so there's a lot of advantages that come as a result of the compounding nature of working with the same coach for a really long period of time, right? And so every time they complete a 90-day transformation, it's like a new level has been unlocked for them in life, which only creates another transformation for them to go through. And so this is a win-win for you and your student, right? Okay, so the student win is that they're getting amazing results and they keep on getting amazing results. And it's a you win because you're not having to chase the next student, right? And so this is important because the best future customer is the one that is already working with you, okay? And so this isn't some sort of manipulation on them or anything like that, okay? We just know that we have much more to offer them after the first 90-day transformation and after they've gone through some of the basics around health. Because here's the thing, once they have the basics, you know that you as an RWP have so much more that you can walk them through as they become more advanced. And so this is also inspiration for you as a remote wellness practitioner to actually work on yourself. Remember, we talked about why this is such an amazing profession is because you actually need to work on yourself. You need to work on your product. You need to work on how is it that you're going to help students go through different obstacles in their life. So that way you can have more and more paths to be able to ascend the student to continue to work with you, right? And unfortunately, too many newbie coaches, too many RWPs who are just brand new amateurs, they think, oh, once I've shared everything that I have to share, I have nothing more to offer. And this could not be any more further from the truth. Why is that the case? Because here's the thing. Two reasons. Number one, you yourself throughout this entire process are going to be learning and growing, okay? This is one quote that I really like. You yourself are most equipped to help people like who you used to be, okay? Remember that. And so as you are learning and growing, you can help the person who is 5 steps behind you. I remember when we first started NutriFit Wellness all the way back in the day, we were still kind of like very fresh on learning some of the things that you've learned now, right? So many, many, many years ago, some of the things that you are learning, we had just implemented in our lives like a year ago. And so all of a sudden we realized, oh snap, the students that we have right now, they are like who we used to be a year ago. And then when we started getting into business coaching and kind of being able to help people scale their businesses, right? As we were learning, right? So we were learning different ways of advertising. We were learning different ways to be able to do student delivery. We were learning different ways to do sales. As we were learning, as we were mastering these skills, as we were going ahead and implementing them ourselves on ourselves, guess what? Our students in the business programs that we had needed help on the same things. And so we were able to go ahead and help them. And so the thing is that you are also going to be working on yourself throughout this process. And the things that are working for you, guess what you do? You add them into your curriculum. Really, really awesome. And so that's the beautiful thing about this is that the trajectory of where your student is going, it's basically like who you used to be, and you can help those exact same people make all of those transformations. Okay, that's number one. The second thing is that the value of what it is that you have to offer as an RWP is not information. A lot of people say, oh, information is free. That is not true. In today's world, because there is so much information, the true cost of information is actually the filtering and the categorization and the curation of that information. Because the truth is that if you just tell somebody, oh, it's on YouTube and it's on Google, well, okay, well, if it was on YouTube and Google, how come we still have people who have difficulty in their life? It's true, it is on Google, it is on YouTube, but it's the curation of that, being able to put that into a container that is organized, that has the accountability, that has the implementation, that has the community, that has the process, that they can actually take it seriously. So if you're telling me that every single thing is already on Google and YouTube, then how come people still have problems in their life? Well, there's something there, right? There's some disconnect. And so the thing is that your value as an RWP is not the information, but the transformation with the becoming process. That is your greatest skill as an RWP, to be able to facilitate lasting change. It's the actual action, the actual implementation of what it is that we are talking about, right? Because remember, humans need to be reminded more than they need to be taught, right? Look at your own consistency in the becoming process. Maybe you yourself have found that there's been lacking in terms of your ability to do the becoming journal, right? And so once you've master the becoming process, then your value to your student is permanent because you can shift anything in their life other than just their health. You can help them in any domain of life because you are kind of like their curator. You are kind of like their advisor. You are their go-to person to be able to help them navigate all of this information that is out there. But then guess what? You're just the enthusiast who's just 5 steps ahead of them. And guess what? You also have a coach. You also are part of a program where you are learning, right? What is that? That's the Remote Wellness Academy. And so it becomes like a trickle effect where as you grow, you're able to go ahead and help your students grow. And that's kind of the chain that we are talking about. And so you're learning the becoming process. You're learning all of the curated knowledge, right? So we've already gone ahead and we've literally curated for you as you've gone through this entire program. We're talking about decades worth of learning, right? When you talk about combined experience, you're talking about over a quarter century worth of combined knowledge and information and all of this transformation process and everything that you've been going through. It's already been curated for you. And so that's why it's so easy for you to be able to go ahead and give this to your students because of the fact that you learned it in a curated fashion. And so you can see that's why it's so powerful as you're going through this entire process. So the student doesn't need more information. They just need help being able to navigate all of the different seasons of their life and all of the different areas of their life. And so that is ultimately why you have unlimited value to be able to provide for your student as you go along this entire process. Okay, so that is the importance of planting those seeds and really being able to make sure that you understand that, hey, there's always something more that I could offer my student. If I kind of run out of things to be able to offer them, that means that I myself have not progressed enough to be able to know what the next step for that student actually is. Okay, so that's the importance of planting the seeds. But then the question is, how do we actually do that in coaching call number 10? So what we're going to do here, and I'm going to get to the script here in just a second, is that what we're going to do is we're going to share a student story. Okay, so we're going to share a student story of a student who was similar to the student that is in front of us and the student's journey and what it was like for that student and where that student actually went next. Now, just a quick note, if you don't have a student success story, which obviously at this point you're in practice right now, so you might not, what you can do is you can actually share your own story of how you basically reached your goal and thought that you were done. And then all of a sudden you started to realize that this was just the beginning of a whole nother world for you. And all of a sudden you got curious about that new world that you were going to go into. And so in the beginning, as you're kind of getting started, that is one way that you are able to kind of navigate this if you don't have some student success stories yet. Okay, that is one way that you can navigate it. There is a second way that I want to go ahead and talk to you about here in just a second. But before we talk about this, I'm going to go ahead and go over to the script. I'm going to walk you through what a student success story might look like here to be able to plant the seeds. Because remember, we're planting the seeds that, hey, there was a student that was just like you. And that student thought that they had it all figured out by the end of their first transformation program. And then they realized, oh snap, there's so much more left for me to actually go through. And then that is the reason why they decided to actually continue going through their transformation, right? So I'm going to share with you this, and I'm going to walk you through the second way that you can actually start to collect student success stories as well. With our permission, I'll walk you through what that looks like. Okay, so an example story. So I'm going to go ahead and talk to Tina again over here. So, hey, Tina, your situation reminds me of a student we once had. And notice the usage of the word we there. That's actually very important because remember, you're talking as an organization, right? So your situation reminds me of a student that we once had, right? She was a super busy executive, a mom. She was on the go. She would stop at Chick-fil-A every morning on her way to work, and she wouldn't always make the healthiest choices. Okay, so in between meetings, she would actually even grab a muffin or something to help her really kind of with her low energy. But what she didn't realize was that she was spiking her insulin and having her go through that blood sugar roller coaster like we talked about before, right? And so with her, we walked her through her 90-day transformation program, and the same program that you've been going through, right? The same program that you've been doing, but customized to her needs. And like you, she started to notice XYZ, right? So you're kind of going ahead and filling in what is similar to the student that you are talking to. So you're going ahead and kind of creating that similarity in the story. And so when she got those results, she started thinking, maybe I'm done with this program. But as she started getting to this new baseline, just like we talked about, she started realizing that, oh man, there's this new world that she hadn't yet tapped into because she had now just started getting the basics down, right? Because before she was like literally just trying to survive, and now she actually just got the basics. And so now she's kind of just like, okay, right? She's not necessarily thriving, but she's not necessarily drowning either, right? But then when she started getting her basics down, she started realizing, oh snap, right? There's a whole other world of actually thriving, not just surviving, right? And so now that she had the basics, she could actually work on thriving properly, right? And so a lot of people start to get the basics and they think, oh, you know what? I'm done. I think I'm finished, right? When the truth is that just a few months ago, these basics, they seemed so advanced, but now they're just your baseline, right? It's just like that season of life diagram that we talked about, right? Initially, when you start off, you're like, oh man, my version 2.0, that's like my dream. That's like advanced to me. That would be amazing. But then once you actually get to that new baseline actually becomes your new version 1.0 self, right? It's exactly like that diagram. And so what used to be our vision of the future is now our baseline, and it's now time for us to be able to get to the next level. In fact, with that other student, we just celebrated her 1-year mark of losing the excess weight and keeping it off and doubling her energy so that way she could be more productive and make healthier choices. And she ended up getting a promotion at work because she was just so much more confident, so much more creative, because she didn't have that brain fog that she was dealing with all of those poor choices around her health that she was making. And so the 90 days that we've been going through and really helping you develop your baseline is really just a launch pad for what's coming next, okay? And so this is when things really start to get interesting, because now that we have some of the basics in line, we can start to see the effects of really taking care of ourselves and how they kind of spill over to other areas of our life, right? All of a sudden, we're starting to see more improvement in our financial situation, in our relationships, in our connection and purpose to something greater, right? And so in our next coaching call, Tina, we're going to do an exercise that I think is going to be extremely inspiring for you and help you redefine where you are right now and where all of this can actually go for you and how amazing this can actually be. Does that sound good? Awesome. And so that is the actual kind of student story that you can walk students through. Okay, now I'll walk you through, exactly like I said, you can go ahead and make your own student story and kind of how you realize that when you got to the end of something, it kind of, wasn't the end of it, it was just the beginning of something. But I did want to go ahead and walk you through the second point on here, which is, can I use RWA's testimonials, right? Isn't that unethical, right? Because we are going to be able to provide for you testimonials as well. And this is something that some students sometimes are like, hey, but wait a second, isn't that unethical? Like I'm saying that I helped this person when I actually didn't do it. Well, let me go ahead and walk you through this so that way you can actually understand how this works in a proper business context, okay? Rather than you seeing it as like a small business owner and, I'm being unethical. Usually those students who are seeing it like that, they're usually kind of putting on a little bit of the failure uniform because they don't realize that the business world is actually much bigger than they thought, and it doesn't actually work that directly. Usually those students who are thinking in that way, they're thinking about ethics on the personal level. So yes, I 100% agree with you. If you take something that is not yours and say that you actually did that, that is 100% unethical. But that is not the way it works in the franchise business model. And you need to understand the difference between personal ethics and when we're talking about things at a grander, bigger scale. Okay. So here's something you might not have thought about. Okay. When you are selling your transformation program, here's a question for you. Are you selling something that you have created yourself as an RWA student or as a person in general? Or are you actually selling the system that RWA has provided for you, right? So if we give you the testimonials that are a result of the system, right, that we have created for you, then aren't you just saying, hey, these are the results that the system has created? I want you to think about this, right? Is it unethical if a Beachbody franchise uses the testimonials from Beachbody HQ, or does that specific Beachbody franchise have to go out and wait to get the results so that way they can actually go ahead and market that using the results that they got from only that franchise? Of course not. That would be silly, right? The Beachbody system is what the franchise is using, and they're saying that, hey, this is what is possible from the system. They're not saying, hey, this is possible from the specific franchise. And so this is, I think, where a lot of students who might put on a little bit of the failure uniform start to get stuck in that mindset and think on the personal ethics side of things. But the truth is that when you're selling a system, it's completely different, right? It's the same thing here, what we're talking about, is that because you are selling the program and the system that RWA has provided for you, we can also provide you our student stories for you to use as well, because it's still 100% ethical because you're talking about the student story that the system has produced. And because it's the system that your student is going to be going through, it's all still ethical, right? What would be unethical is for you to go ahead and create your own system that has no proven track record, that is not based on anything that it is that we talked about, and then from a completely different perspective, okay? And then you go ahead and use our testimonials and say, oh yeah, I got this result because of that. That is what you call, ladies and gentlemen, bait and switch. Does that make sense? And so this is the power of the franchise licensing model. That's the reason why you signed that student licensing agreement, right? The reason why is because we've created this system so that way you can benefit from the system, right? You don't have to worry about trying to sell yourself because you're only ever really just selling the system that you got trained for and have access to. And so I always want you to remember this, is that you are never alone. You're a part of an organization, which is Remote Wellness Academy, Academy that has your back every step of the way. And so the same way that you're going to be telling your students that you are going to be over delivering for them and how transformational your program is going to be for your students, well, guess what? That's exactly what we are doing for you here at Remote Wellness Academy as well. Because guess what? You've trusted us with your time, your energy, and your financial resources, and we do not take that responsibility lightly. There's a reason why we have the original source of the RWA over delivery promise, right? We're teaching you how to be able to create your own RWA delivery promise. But guess what? We didn't learn that from someone else. We didn't have any coaches who told us, hey, make sure that you create this over delivery promise for your students. We literally created that for you as a Remote Wellness Academy student, and then you went ahead and felt the benefit of that, and now we're going ahead and giving you that so that way you can implement it inside of your own remote wellness practice as well, okay? And so we created it for ourselves, for you as an RWA student, and now we're being able to show you how to be able to use it as well, okay? So we are the original source of the RWA over delivery promise. So holy over delivery, Batman. RWA is amazing. And so that's why what it is that we're talking about is the power of the structure that we have created here. We got so sick and tired of so many gurus out there really trying to sell people, oh, you're a beginner, and hey, this is what you got to do. But the truth is that all of these things out there, you got to learn how to be able to sell yourself, right? And so instead we created a system, an organization, something that you can kind of have a licensing franchising model in which you can literally just use all of the things that we have, and that way you can actually go ahead and get started much quicker. And so that way it expedites your entire process. That is the value of what it is that we have provided here. And so even though we have this student story here as an example that we are demonstrating for you, this is a real life student story. This is not something that we just made up, okay? Now, if you choose, you want to go ahead and role play a different student story, that is completely up to you. In the future upcoming modules, we'll talk to you about how you can get access to our student stories as well, and you can be able to use that if you so choose to do so inside of your remote wellness practice as well, okay? So that is the power of what it is that we are doing here. That is exactly how it is 100% ethical, because you guys are literally using our exact system out of the box as you go ahead and really make it prosperous from there, okay? Now, the last point I want to go ahead and make at the end of this new experience exercise here is that an important note on the student stories. I would urge you not to stress about the details of the student story right now. I just went ahead and made a few notes of it, but honestly, you can even role play with the example one that we have. Don't worry about trying to create your own for the purposes of the practice call. For the purposes of the practice call, literally, don't worry, this is not the one you're going to be using with the final students, right? So you can literally make one up if you wanted to, because it's only for the purposes of the practice call. And then once you're getting ready to be able to deliver this to real students, we can then help you refine this and make it even more legit and provide you with other student stories if you need it, and XYZ, or help you create your own and all that kind of stuff. But for the purposes of the practice calls, remember, finding your own voice in and of itself is already challenging. You don't need to add trying to go ahead and customize all of this kind of stuff from the get-go, okay? So just go ahead and use what it is that we're providing, and then once you actually get to your final program, we'll be able to go ahead and tweak it and make it better from there. And so with that being said, that is the end of this specific part when we talk about the exercise part. Now we're going to go ahead and get into the action steps for practice coaching call number 10. Of course, you go ahead and say, hey, cool, let's go ahead and talk about the action steps. We're going to go ahead and do an activity called the past, present, future me activity. And then you're going to go ahead and share your screen and walk the student through that activity. Of course, you are going to remember that you also did this activity at the end of module 3. So that way you should have the experience from it. You are now starting to realize why throughout this entire certification program, we said, do not skip the exercises. Even though you might already know some of the things that we're talking about, don't skip the exercises, because it's going to be so invaluable for you, because you already have the experience when you start to deliver it in this specific way to your upcoming students, okay? And then from there, you can go ahead and provide a little bit more explanation on here and say, cool, so this is an activity that you're going to be able to revisit again and again and again, Tina, throughout your entire life and every season of your life. And so just like we talked about earlier, it's very common for most of us to be able to get caught up in, hey, what's next? Where are we lacking, right? More. I'm not enough. And so the reason why this activity is so powerful is because it allows us to be able to take a step back and see our own progress and see how far we've come. We get a chance to be able to focus on what it is that we do have and what it is that we do want and where it is that we have gotten. And so that way we can go ahead and do that before we get back into the trenches, right? Does this sound familiar? Yes, exactly, right? This is exactly the same mindset that we talked about earlier inside of this coaching call, right? It's kind of like having this mini cloud session where we can get our head above the water and see, okay, hey, before we go back into the trenches, let's just see how far we've actually come, right? Pretty cool, huh? Do you have any questions for me on this? No. no, I don't have any questions for you on this. Okay, cool. Awesome. So go ahead and write that down on your specific student action notes. Okay, beautiful. Then after that, let's go ahead and talk, Tina, because I want to go ahead and talk to you about being able to create your own action step as well. Okay, so what we're going to do is, what is one action step that you can do this week that is related to insert the area of life that you know that the student wants to work on? Okay, so what you're doing here in action step number 2 on breaking frame to talk to you guys as RWA students is that you're going ahead and empowering the student to be able to go ahead and create their own action steps, right? And so as the student starts to get more advanced, usually after around coaching call 6, 7, 8, you're empowering them to be able to start getting their own action steps designed. So that way, not only are they actually being empowered for that, but they get to decide exactly what it is that they want to work on. And then that way you can just support them instead of you actually telling them, okay? That is action step number 2. And then finally, action step number 3 is where they go ahead and continue to build on what was already covered. So you go ahead and ask them, hey, finally this week we're going to continue building on XYZ. And we've said this many times before, is that the action steps are an awesome place for you to actually go ahead and give quick tips regarding like dietary changes, sleep, movement, any kind of thing that doesn't need its own coaching call. You can go ahead and mention that inside of the action steps. And then from there, of course, you are going to go ahead and have them repeat the action steps back to you, so that way they can go ahead and make sure that they are taking ownership of those action steps. Of course, if you suspect they may not follow through, there is a scripting around that as well. Of course, from there, we're going to go ahead and get into part 6, which is the ahas, insights, appreciations, and takeaways specifically from this coaching call. So that is going to be what you go ahead and walk them through there. And then, of course, the closing of the actual coaching call from there, making sure that you actually do have a very specific time and date. So that way they do have that open loop and they can expect that you will be checking up on all of their action steps. So that way they know that they need to actually get them done. Okay, so that is going to be the actual explanation and the scripting around practice coaching call number 10. From there, we're going to go ahead and talk about the importance of learning how to ditch the script, especially at this point in coaching call number 10, practice coaching call number 10, right? You've done enough of these that you are going to start to get an idea of how the flow works. Now, if you are trying to manage actually keeping engaged with the student and managing the script and managing the guide, and you're trying to do all 3 of these or all 4 of these or all 5 of these, all these things at once, you're going to have a very difficult time actually having a flow. The only way that you're actually going to be able to get better is by actually being able to practice this on your own time, right? You got to make sure that you're practicing this when you're not in the game. You got to practice the script over and over and over again. And then eventually, even in your practice, start to get away from the script, start to be able to quiz yourself, start to be able to test yourself. Say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do this section and I'm going to go ahead and see how good I do, right? I'm going to go ahead, maybe even record myself. I'm going to go ahead and kind of see how good I do inside of this section and then look back at the script. Did I miss any points? Did I cover everything? Was everything covered on there? And so that is how you can start to be able to actually ditch the script, because ultimately, remember, you do not want to be a remote control student. You want to be a remote wellness practitioner, but not a remote control student. And so that's why it's going to be very important for you to start learning how to be able to ditch the script. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult for you to actually get into the flow of things, and you're going to have a lot of difficulty actually being able to be engaged with the student because you're trying to manage the script at the same time, right? Instead, you're focused on, okay, this is what I'm delivering, and the only thing is, okay, I got the guide and the images, and then I have the student that's in front of me that I'm making sure that is staying engaged with me, right? That's it. It's very simple. And once you actually start to ditch the script, that's when everything is going to really start to make sense for you. Okay. So ultimately, remember, this is what we talk about when we say that education is not the memorization of facts. It is the training of the mind to think. Okay. And so if you want to be spoon fed, you are in the wrong place. You are going to have to make sure that you are putting in the time and that you are starting to experiment and finding what works best for you. And the beautiful thing about that is that as you find what works best for you, you're going to find things that other students are going to share with you. You're going to share with other students. And then all of a sudden, the entire community is learning how to be able to grow and get better together because of the fact that everybody is innovating and not everybody is being a remote control student. Everybody's trying to be able to ditch the script, and then they're getting better and they're sharing tips and tricks and strategies to be able to do that, right? So this is the core foundational knowledge, but then all of the other learning is going to come from you actually trusting yourself to be able to get away from the script and being able to take it from there. Okay, so that is the importance of that. Of course, from there, we talk about the importance of the pillars of your transformation product. Remember, this is just one of the pillars that we are zooming in on, and then we're going to be talking about the synergy of how all of this comes together in the upcoming module as well. Okay, with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about practice coaching call number 10. Of course, at this point, you are an absolute master of this. One important note, remember that you will be working with a new partner for this next set of calls. So it is going to be partner number 4 that you are going to be working working on for this next set of practice calls. Okay. Of course, at this point, you already understand the importance of these practice calls. We've already hammered them over and over and over again. So that's going to be important there. And then of course, the instructions for this, make sure that you are doing this step by step, following the instructions that we talked about in a previous training. Make sure you are working with a new student. Make sure that you are actually introducing yourself before you start, because hey, it's a new partner, it's a new student in the RWA community. You get to be able to introduce yourselves. Maybe you worked with them in the previous skill session and previous module, but you definitely haven't worked with them yet on the coaching calls. And so that's one of the advantages that you can go ahead and have and introduce yourself, build some rapport. That's going to be really awesome. And then really go ahead and make sure that you are role playing. Make sure that you are going ahead and for both you and your partner, right? Make sure that you are taking it seriously and kind of pretending to be the ideal student. So that way your actual partner has something to be able to lean on and actually learn throughout this entire process. Of course, the instructions, make sure you do go ahead and actually prepare ahead of time. Otherwise, I'm telling you, you're going to start to have a very difficult time here as you start to get into coaching calls 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. At this point, in the second half of this game of you doing practice coaching calls, if you don't actually take the time to practice all this out loud, if you don't get to the point where you're starting to make bullet points, if you don't start to get to the point where you're starting to have a flow away from the script, it's going to start to become more and more difficult for you. And it's going to feel very clunky because of the fact that you're having to kind of not get your flow as you're talking to your practice student. Okay, so that's going to be very important for you to follow the instructions on there as well. Of course, make sure that you are scheduling them so that way you don't take a gazillion months in order to actually get through all of these practice coaching calls. And as I say every single time, I know for a fact that you are going to do great. Of course, here is the difference here though, is that I know that you are not going to be one of those failure students who wears a failure uniform, who actually gets stuck in the valley of despair and realizes, oh snap, I suck. And all of a sudden, you know what that means? Because I suck, that means I got to go jump ship and I can't actually do this. You're going to get to the point of conscious incompetence and you're going to realize that guess what? Anything that I decide to do in life, I'm going to get to this point where I realize that I suck. And it's normal because every single person that ever succeeded before me also had that realization. And guess what? The people who actually succeed are the ones who actually keep on pushing through, who actually keep on putting in the reps, who actually keep on implementing the knowledge that they're learning, and they get to the point where they have conscious competence, and then eventually they get to the point where they have mastery, which is unconscious competence. They're so good that they don't even have to think about it. And so as long as you stick with it, you will make it through all 4 phases of learning, and that is the entire process of learning as you go through all of this. Okay, so as we start to close out this, we are going to go ahead and talk about your action steps. Of course, make sure that you do go ahead and watch and study this training in full. Make sure you go ahead and download the appropriate Google Drive files that go along with this practice coaching call, put them in the appropriate Google Drive folder. Make sure you actually go ahead and prepare your student action notes. Make sure you go ahead and comment your availability on the student community post. Make sure that you go ahead and have that DM conversation. Make sure you practice. If you have any questions that are specific to this specific coaching call, make sure that you actually do go ahead and drop them on the actual post. Make sure you conduct your practice call with your partner, upload the practice call to YouTube, and then comment with your recording and your takeaways. And just a quick note on here, I sometimes notice that students, when they start to get to the point here at the end of these coaching calls, is that they're like, okay, you know what? I've done this a lot of times. I'm just going to go ahead and leave like a 1 sentence or a 2 sentence. Really go ahead and put your takeaways for this specific coaching call. If you say, oh yeah, the coaching call was good, it was like the other ones. Well, no, it wasn't like the other ones. Coaching call number 10 is different than the other ones. And so what was it about this specific subject matter that was interesting for you? What did you get away from this? What was all of your takeaways from this? What was challenging for you to be able to deliver this specific subject matter, right? It's not the same as all of the other coaching calls. So really make sure that you are expanding on it. Make sure that you are actually putting all of your takeaways and not just going light on your takeaways on there. Okay, so that is going to be practice coaching call number 10. I'm super excited to go ahead and see you absolutely crush it. With that being said, this is Coach Yasin checking out, and I will catch you inside of the next training.